on today's show.
I wrote a post, 8 Things to Know Before Dating an Entrepreneur, which was probably one of my more popular posts only because and it was equally popular both with the entrepreneurs themselves and then the people trying to figure out how the hell to date them and how the heck to date them, because they really are their own breed of, in my case, boyfriend. The novelty seeking, the impulsivity, the curiosity, the open-mindedness, it brings with it its own set of curiosities that can be very challenging in a relationship. They don't like, they sort of go into entrepreneurship because they want to be the boss and because they want something new every day. And that doesn't always lend itself to being in a relationship. But I also think that those same qualities can make being in a relationship extremely rewarding and, if nothing else, very, very interesting.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Creator Institute podcast. Your host, Koester.
Hey everyone, it's Eric. On today's episode, we're going to meet a young woman who truly has made me rethink a lot about mindset, particularly of innovators and creators. And Jessica Carson is someone who has sort of gone through the full gamut. We'll hear about her adventures breaking into tech, understanding what it's like to sort of be an outsider in the world of venture capital. And ultimately today, she released a new publication called the Disruptor Syndrome, where she analyzes some of the core sort of mental challenges and struggles that disruptors and innovators and creators have. And in our discussion, we dive into some of the aspects that are both superpowers for the creator, but also some of those elements that make them lonely. And one of the things I thought was most fascinating about our conversation that lines up to what I've seen is that to be a really great creator, you're often going to need someone who could be your coach, your Sherpa, your guide. And you'll hear some of Jess's stories, even about dating creators and what she learned from those experiences. Her writing is terrific. I think her blog, ColorfulCortex, does share some really interesting insights. In particular, I think I found some ways to think about how to deal with some of the struggles, the imposter syndrome, the issues that people have when they're thinking about what it's like to be a creator, and ultimately the mental struggles, the FOMO, the imposter syndrome, all those things that we wrestle with. So we'll dive into as much as we can. I probably could have spoken to her for hours, but we talk about some of the core things that she's previewed in her series, The Disruptor Syndrome, about mental health, about psychology, her own journeys as an outsider in a lot of ways into the world of startups and venture capital. So it's a great episode. I'm really excited to share it with you. And I think hopefully it'll help you unlock the thoughts about how do you process these sort of insecurities and fears that emerge when you decide to be a creator, take a risk and create your own book, your podcast, your video series, whatever it may be, to know that you're going to go outside of the confines of kind of the support structures we have and to be able to create. You may need to think about kind of some of the challenges you'll face, and having some of these insights that Jess shares is terrific. Jess Carson, everyone. It is so great to be here with you today, Jess. It's been such a pleasure for me to kind of see you in sort of these adventures that have happened, which feels like in a lifetime, but it's happened over a relatively short time.
We have some stories. Oh my gosh. Wow. All the things we have done together.
I know. So to set the context, just I want to talk about why I texted you on a Sunday morning saying I have to sit down and talk to you about what you're doing. It's because you've put out a new series that you're early in testing in some ways, but the series on disruptors. Yes. And I think I want to read a quote that I found so inspiring in the first piece, which was this. And you used the word disruptors, and we talked earlier about the word disruptors is a big pool of people who are entrepreneurs, and not entrepreneurs, but thinking in that different way. And I often use the word creators, but I think they're basically the same for all intents and purposes. But here's the quote that I saw. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to talk to Jess. So here it is. Disruptors are wired for potency in every sense of the word. Every feature of them is designed for manifestation. Their bodies are lightning rods for energy. Their minds are cabled for novelty. Their spirits are driven by exploration. But the disruptor's inborn nature is a gift and a curse. These striking features also make them uniquely vulnerable. A great double-edged sword, their most valuable qualities leave them susceptible for psychological, physical, and spiritual distress.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. But it's amazing. I think what I loved about it so much so is I think you've highlighted something that we chatted about before the show began, which is this sort of challenge that these magical beings out there, the creators, people who are doing books and podcasts and companies, they have. And that is that they leave the sort of the common nest and they go off on their own. So tell me why this class of human, the disruptor, the creator, was so interesting to you to study.
Oh my gosh, where do I begin? Well, so it all started when I was a neuroscience and psychology researcher at the National Institutes of Health, and at the time was starting to develop a lot of friendships and relationships in the startup, entrepreneurship, VC space in DC. And the first thing that struck me about this group was the magnetism, the fact that, when you were around these people and these people that I was sort of being exposed to for the first time in my life, because I had really just kind of been in academia, being around them was magnetic. It's palpable. It's like biting on aluminum foil. And there was just something different and weird and awesome about these people. And so that got me started on my journey into startups and venture capital, and now kind of tying that back into the world of psychology. But having that framework and that knowledge base in psychology sort of made me move into all of my interactions, all of my jobs with this very acute awareness of why these people are the way they are, why they have these sort of psychological idiosyncrasies, these emotional idiosyncrasies, and why they are this energetically powerful. And then the sort of...
Before we even go that, you write in one of your blog posts, you talk about even dating someone who's sort of the entrepreneur, right? You talk about just that, like, almost it's like night and day. Like there's this like, there's the joke about dating the bad boy, but this is a different type. Like this is sort of the energy that also has its pluses and minuses. So tell me about that dating. I mean, not to put you on the spot, you don't have to use any names, but there's something about it, that the magnetism that you write in your blog, and it's you sort of see this in a different way.
Yeah. I wrote a post, 8 things to know before dating an entrepreneur, which was probably one of my more popular posts, only because and it was equally popular both with the entrepreneurs themselves and then the people trying to figure out how the hell to date them and how the heck to date them, because they really are their own breed of, in my case, boyfriend. They, the novelty seeking, the impulsivity, the curiosity, the open-mindedness, it brings with it its own set of curiosities that can be very challenging in a relationship. They don't like, they sort of go into entrepreneurship because they want to be the boss and because they want something new every day. And that doesn't always lend itself to being in a relationship. But I also think that those same qualities can make being in a relationship extremely rewarding and, if nothing else, very, very interesting.
that is a good way to say. I think what was interesting about some of the ways you describe dating entrepreneurs is probably similar to what we experienced when we were in the investment side too. There's something about that sort of, I will believe whatever you're selling, right? Kind of thing. And I think there's why oftentimes people say you need someone who has that sort of that it factor. And I think it plays out both in when you're seeking capital from, in the venture capital space, as well as that. And it's, really quickly, I had a co-founder named Bo Fishback, and Bo is not a particularly attractive man, but man, he just could attract people. So it's not necessarily about physical attractiveness per se. It's much more so about that factor that makes you feel like you're the most special person in the world, whether it's investing or whether it's dating.
Absolutely. And they really do. They have that equality, but The problem is they oftentimes know it, right? And so, I mean, the one of the first entrepreneurs that I, attempted to date, it was this constant sort of battle to be the most novel thing on the menu.
Mm-hmm.
It was competing for the very sort of flighty Labrador Retriever attention.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, I think I've refined the art of it a little bit, but it definitely is an interesting area to study. I think someone should pursue it full time.
Yeah, no, I think maybe not the dating part, but the study of that for sure.
Yeah.
And so you've had this really unique sort of arc to your journey of understanding and studying this class of human, the creator, the disruptor. And I think you went from sort of no exposure to, a lot of exposure through Ivy and through venture capital investing, where we got to spend a lot of time together. And now you've sort of taken it back in some ways back to the psychology side of it. What was the thing that was the most surprising as you started to sort of reflect and tie these pieces together, saying, all right, there's something unique going on about these brains, more so than just like its attractiveness, but there's something unique about them that said, I need to understand.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of it came through both friendships, but also relationships just by their intimate nature. And recognizing that even the entrepreneurs, the disruptors, the innovators, the influencers, the trendsetters, the go-getters, the with the most impeccable resumes, the perfect LinkedIns, the fabulous networks, they were harboring some of the most palpable funks that were really, really surprising to me as I got to know them. And I'm very grateful and glad that, these people have trusted me and opened up to me. But the anxiety, the depression, the addiction, the eating disorders, the phobias, the OCD, it really kind of runs the gamut, seem to be particularly not only common, but also uniquely potent in these disruptors. And I wanted to try to figure out, was it causation? Was it correlation? What was the sort of chicken and egg situation? Was their environment, their job sort of igniting this in them, or was it something that because of their tendency, their proclivity to go in these sort of extreme directions on the psychological, emotional, spiritual ends of the spectrum, actually made them more likely to be a better entrepreneur and dig into that. And that actually does turn out to be the case.
Yeah, and we talked earlier. One of the things that we sort of shared together is a number of entrepreneurs have sort of confided in you just to say, like, knowing your background in psychology and research, to sort of say, I don't know what's going on, I need help. Yeah. And it's an interesting thing that I think there is this tension between recognizing help and seeking it that sort of is lacking. This concept of, like, we talk about Steve Jobs having a coach like Bill Campbell and Larry Page and the others. So there's this real tension of, like, I have problems, I can recognize them and doing something about it.
Well, and I think one of the major reasons that is because, and one of the posts that I wrote is on impression management. There is this great stigma, especially in the entrepreneurial community, especially if you're raising venture capital, that you have to be extremely locked down about your private life, especially anything that could threaten your chances of investment or your chances of being able to hire the employees you want or maintain the impeccable reputation. And I think that we've seen examples of this go awry in the startup world where, someone gets into a funk or goes down a spiral and it ends up not only not great for them, but not great for their company.
Right.
And so there is this, I think, incorrect perception that, disruptors should not seek help for these issues. And in fact, I think it's opposite. I think that the more vulnerable and open and honest they are, it's not only is it a burden off their shoulders, but it's also refreshing because what is most personal is most universal. And that in sharing those kind of dirty secrets, you end up really engendering I think enhanced loyalty
Mm-hmm.
and affection from your fans, from your employees, from whoever it is that you're seeking approval from.
It's amazing. It's so I want to make a general plug to check out your blog, which is ColorfulCortex.co. We'll link to it. But I think it was fascinating to sort of read through, and I am an entrepreneur, so I come from this creator world. So reading it, I felt like at times I was like, is she talking to me? Like it was very much. I mean,
we did sit next to each other for.
That's true. We
you inspired half the article.
Oh God, I hope not. Well, but I think that what was interesting is the questions that you ask the creator or the disruptor to ask are ones that I think are universal for the sort of tensions we have. So I want to spend a few minutes going through a couple of them because I think that there was some. I think it's instructive for people to talk through and talk. So I want to take a couple of these that I thought were particularly interesting, and a lot of what I want this sort of episode to be about is thinking about that with the heavy is the burden that the creator and the disruptor wears, that there are consequences to it. Yeah. And I think you highlight some of them, and I'd love to get your take on how someone who is making this choice to create something can deal with some of these mental sort of challenges they'll feel as they go through it. So the first one you aptly title FOMO, which I think is good. And the summary of it is sort of novelty versus commitment is kind of a lot of these things are sort of extremes, the novelty to commitment side, and everything is sort of grayish. But I want to read a quick quote that I found to be pretty compelling. And then maybe you can talk a little bit about what you observed and how, what you observed and what some of the things that people can think about as they think this one. So, and here's your quote from the article. The issue is not that disruptors don't have the ability to commit. It's that they don't often know what to commit to. It's impossible to prioritize your decisions until you know your values. So that's know thyself, so to speak.
Yeah.
Talk about what you observed with sort of these folks and FOMO and this concept.
Yeah. So sort of part of the job description with being an entrepreneur, being a disruptor, is that you have to be curious and open-minded and novelty seeking. And actually, novelty seeking is directly correlated with the entrepreneurial persona. And novelty seeking and sensation seeking is defined by the need to constantly experience newness, freshness, sort of never experience the same day twice. And again, this goes back to, being in a relationship, sometimes being very difficult with entrepreneurs. But because of this inherent aspect of their personality that makes them so good at going out and exploring their world and poking at their world and, turning over rocks and seeing, the worms that are under there and saying, this is an opportunity to do something, that also means that whether in their personal or their professional lives, they don't often commit to a lot. And the identity is formed through committing to people, to ideologies, to practices,
to values. Is the word you said, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so, what I and having sort of a entrepreneurial disposition myself. Right. I mean, I write from a place of knowing. And so, I started to in all of the articles, sort of give up my own experience with it and to sort of make it easier to process for the reader. And so for me, I found that, I was likely to sort of change jobs quickly before really learning intensely and in depth from one, or changing relationships or friend groups a lot, sort of always wanting to experience different things with different people. And the sort of case that I made, again, through my own experience, that FOMO is this really interesting magnet and spotlight because it directs you to your values. You can basically say that because I have FOMO, which causes me to jump around to different jobs, it means that I value professional growth and development in a meaningful career. And when your FOMO is sort of reframed as a way to actually identify and tap into your values, it becomes less of maybe a stigmatizing or a scary thing and more of an education where you can say, oh, I'm exploring all these relationships because what I really seek is a deep, meaningful, intimate relationship.
We talk about I have described this before as sort of creators are oftentimes they can harness this in a way to basically iterate rapidly.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing that you sort of have spotlighted is that it can also be something that you can iterate to nothingness, right? You could just be iterating for the purpose of iterating. And that, once you find a rock that's pretty good, like dig a little deeper, like go understand more. But like the jumping can be something that you can never develop any depth unless you commit to sort of once you find something.
Exactly. And I think that the disruptors dilemma, the disruptors funk that they get themselves into is when they find themselves sort of experiencing everything and committed to nothing. When they find themselves with a buffet of experiences and a network that's larger than they could have ever hoped or dreamed for, and yet the depth is completely missing. They have 1,000 wells a foot deep and no wells, 1,000 feet deep. So
that's an amazing one. No, it's really interesting. I mean, and again, I'm sort of some ways I'm guilty as charged in some senses. And I would share from my own experiences the fact of having everything that you could do. It sort of, you don't make it very far.
Yeah.
It is what like the most magical, happiest places is when I'm like, I want to do this and go as deep as possible. But I think you're right. It's like a balancing tool to be able to find that thing rapidly, but then also to be able to, in some ways, like then once you have it, you sort of have to say like, cool,
you have to dig your heels in. You do. Because, and this is, part of the disruptor's curse is that 99% of the time their issue, their karma in life will not be that they will not find what they're good at. It's that they'll find that they're good at too many things, and that like this sort of curiosity will show them that they're capable of so much. And so the trick is not picking one, but pick a set, like pick a theme and then go for it. And then if you shift, you change, you pivot, you iterate, that's great. But like, know that you did something long enough to say like, I gave it my all and I learned as much as I could.
And I think it fits within even you and your own journey. And I think I always, you would always describe yourself as very interested in the human mind and psychology and also entrepreneurship and the innovative world. And it's been really interesting to see this.
Those are my wells. Right? Those are my deep wells.
You're not picking one to say like I have to do one or the other. It's that I'm going to go deep on this. And I think it's again fascinating to observe these sorts of elements that you've experienced in some ways, sort of codified in this set. So I want to take you to the next one that I found interesting was about give me your elevator pitch is the summary, the duality versus fluidity. And so let me give you a line that I found to be compelling from your write-up. And it said, it's a commercial and you're the product. Do you want money, a dream job, respect? You can get it all with a killer elevator pitch. But first, you must productize yourself. No pressure. So as in the world of, sort of personal branding and productizing yourself, what say you of this
elevator pitch? So, I mean, on one hand, thank God for the elevator pitch because of the disruptors' tendency towards FOMO and curiosity. They, if they weren't forced to cut down their pitch, their personal bio, I mean, you'd be stuck at the networking event with them, like, in a corner for 2 hours. And this and you'd just be hearing about every rabbit hole that they've ever jumped into. So the elevator pitch is useful. But where the elevator pitch can get disruptors in trouble is when they define themselves so concretely and with the without the foresight that they will change, they will learn new strengths, they will learn that strengths that they thought they had actually aren't their strengths when they're put in new environments that force them to flex different muscles. And so for me personally, especially having jumped from very logical, rigid academia to then sort of socialite startup to then this kind of hyper masculine venture capital, I found that, my elevator pitch kept shifting with each job, but I was kind of getting whiplash because I was just was changing it based on these aspects that aligned with my current job. And then every time it changed, I was like, who the hell am I?
Yeah, right.
So I found a few tricks that at least worked for me in terms of understanding who I am more fundamentally, more fluidly, and more thematically rather than more rigidly. And so, and I outlined this in the article, but It's finding your themes over your aspects, finding your archetypes over your job function. So I find archetypes a fascinating way to kind of get to the core of who you are and the things that will never change and the things that you can take with you across jobs rather than it has to change every time you change jobs, because I think that that's a recipe for an identity crisis.
Right.
When you're constantly chasing around, who am I? And then, I think the biggest issue with the elevator pitch, and again, speaking from experiences, when you sort of share it around town and it's all over your range list and your LinkedIn and your Crunchbase and you're here and you're there and your blog and you're, and then you change it.
Yeah.
Everyone's like,
what happened to you? Right.
Like, she's having, it's like something is, there's a personal implosion happening. And then, you can start to believe the same thing. And so in identifying who you are more fundamentally and creating an elevator pitch around things and aspects and parts of yourself that don't change, you kind of give yourself more wiggle room for, changing tides.
It's interesting. So we with the authors, one of the things I learned from over the first, we're now on sort of our sixth group through. The first ones, I just sort of said, like, what do you want to write on? And it was this, like, I don't know, right? I'm not sure what I want to create. And now I spend 4 weeks putting them through a series of exercises, really trying to get to that why versus what that you're sort of laying out. And I think what's interesting is that I think the two things that I observed that sort of sound consistent is that we either hyper genericize it. So we say, I want to be in venture capital, which is not really, doesn't mean anything, right? Like, or you sort of get so like niche that you don't think about, this, you think of this, I'm a Facebook digital marketing, social media manager, right? Like, so there's this interesting thing about understanding your why that will transcend that and being willing. And I think it actually fits back into your FOMO piece of when you find that it's easier to commit to that something longer, right? You're like, oh, well, I could put a year into this because it's not just an action. Right?
Yes, absolutely. And being able to sort of pick, identity defining qualities that you can stick with and run with long term, saying like, I am the priest archetype where I'm just kind of here to inspire and lead versus I am here to be the yoga teacher or the venture capitalist. It's a more generous and forgiving way, I think, to define yourself.
It's interesting, and I think what's compelling about it is I think I have described this as living your life with a compass rather than a map.
Yeah.
And so it does require you to pick and say, like, I'm going to go north by northwest, but it also allows you to be flexible and move. And I think back to this, fear of, well, I don't know if I want to go north by northwest. You have to figure something out. You can always turn around and go back if you need to, but that process of, I remember in Mark Zuckerberg's his commencement address, he said everyone should find their purpose. Everyone should find it, but he didn't give any techniques to do it. And so I think your point is to say, you sort of need to figure out what is that elevator pitch that'll transcend a little bit of time, but don't freak out about making it perfect because it can change.
Yeah. And one of the other pieces is defining your intentions over your goals. Because if you sort of publicly, and not that there's anything wrong with goals, I think goals are great, but especially when you include goals in your elevator pitch, saying something like, I want to be a psychologist. Well, I may or may not become a psychologist, but I can say that my intention is to uplift and inspire others through understanding their identity and the core of their self. And that's a more that's not going to happen.
Right.
Like that's just what I'm here to do.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
That's really powerful. The intentions over goals is an interesting one. I've not heard that frame that way. It reminds me a little of the Simon Sinek Start With Why, that kind of that framework. And I think, again, these are all interrelated, as you say throughout the article. Like it's like a squeeze ball, these move together. But I do think there's something to that fear of choosing that makes people either go super, super narrow because they know they can attain it, or they go super, super broad because it doesn't mean anything. And that sort of that middle area is where you actually are intentional about it to make something specific.
Yeah. And I think this framework is good for people who have a little bit of a fear of choosing. I have few friends who are currently using the framework right now to their elevator pitches, and so far it's going very well.
That's great. It's really interesting. So I want to talk the next one about that you title the impression manager, and the two ends of the spectrum, as you always lay out in these, is perfectionism versus vulnerability. And so I want to give a quote from an article, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you see this manifest itself in the Disruptor creator. The cure for the impression manager's identity crisis is a vulnerability, permission to be exposed in words, thoughts, and actions to create space for gross, awkward, cringeworthy, awesome authenticity. So why is this something that you saw manifest itself in the creator disruptor that was unique to them?
Yeah. So impression management is, again, basically a job requirement of disruptors. They need to manage their impressions with their employees, with their VCs, with whoever their stakeholders are. And this amplifies a common tendency in the disruptor, which is perfectionism. No secret there. But it can cause it to spiral. And so the impression manager finds themselves very often in a state of cognitive dissonance where they are portraying a reality that is very different from real life. And when you are in this state of dissonance long enough, it really starts to impact the identity. It starts to impact the individual's understanding of their big S self. And so, the article walks through some steps to start understanding, okay, where are you managing your impression in a way that's not serving you? Why are you doing it? And then how can you resolve it? And so essentially what it is impression management is wearing a mask. And so in exploring how this looked for myself, I found that I tend to ramp up my impression management skills when I don't feel like the smartest person in the room, when I feel like I'm not the one best suited or best qualified for the job, when my credibility is threatened, essentially. And so the kind of mask I don is projecting my own deficits on the people around me, which is obviously, it's terrible for me and it's terrible for everyone around me. Right. So becoming aware of how I'm managing my impression, why I'm doing it, and then what I can do to, relieve myself of that cognitive dissonance in the future, makes it a lot easier for everybody.
And what do you talk about the secret weapon being authenticity, and I think, how have you seen that play out? Because I think I observed, and I'll tell one of my favorite Carson stories, in a good way, I think, is this concept of authenticity, because you were playing in, as you said, a hyper masculine sort of boys club, and weren't coming from a lot of those traditional places of
cigars and all.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what I was going to tell the story of the story of Jess that I think amplifies this the best is we were in Atlanta helping to sort of launch a new market for our sort of network venture capital firm, and we sort of co-sponsored this event, and we didn't really have much to do with it. We just sort of sent some money and showed up and walked in, and you were the only female. There was shocker, right? But there's, 50 guys and cigars are out and such. And I think my favorite story is that for you, one approach could have been to sort of amp up all of your sorts of masks, but instead you sort of walked in with yourself, listen, I'm someone who studies humans and that's why I'm here, and let me have a cigar. So I think that's really fascinating, is that was very authentic.
Yeah.
And you didn't sort of try and out cap table them.
Right.
You sort of went in with what you knew, which was your femininity and also your sort of humanity, which is I understand people. And so let me talk about what I understand about people.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that was one of probably our favorite, or one of my favorite memories together. But you're so right. And I think that authenticity and vulnerability, I know it's a hot topic now, but it really is so underrated, especially in the disruptor and entrepreneur community, because letting your guard down, I promise, I've seen it time and time again, it'll get you so much further, so much faster. I mean, I have found, at least in my own life, that once I started kind of like letting my own freak flag fly a lot more liberally, things just, get a lot sunnier from there.
And what did you find about that? It was interesting. I think once you embraced the fact that this psychology element that you bring to the cult of the founder, how did you see that change the way that people saw you in even the venture capital space? Because I think there was this sort of moment when you said, I can try and boot myself up with cap tables and, liquidation preferences, or like, I'm going to own it, that I understand people.
Yeah. I mean, it really, it came in like this repeated, to use the sort of buzz term, like product market fit, where like the opportunities kept finding me, and that no matter, what city we went to, what companies we were working with, what, people I was in a relationship with, or friends that I had, there was this like resonance and comfort, I guess, that they felt, and also this need for an outlet,
Right.
that apparently was not it was a need that was not being scratched. They found that outlet through me. And so in experiencing this, 25,000 times over, you start to say like, oh my God, I mean, I know there are a lot of coaches and you could have a psychologist or whatever, but something's missing.
Right.
And I think there's an opportunity here. And that's I guess that's the entrepreneur in me.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's just an interesting thing that the, people who in some ways don't just admit what they don't know, and what they do know, they get so wrapped in what they don't have versus really leaning into their strengths. And I think it ties into some of these other pieces. So it was cigars and all, favorite memory of mine. All right, I want to go on to the next one that I thought was really interesting about you called the era of the personal brand. We've talked a little bit. This sort of ties into Impression Manager a bit. And the two extremes are permanence versus experimentation, which I think, sort of touches on some elements, but maybe a more specific piece here. So let me read a quote that resonated with me. An era in which the self must be aligned, easily digestible, and universally consistent across all your digital properties and in-person interactions. Your happenings and whereabouts carefully chronicled on blogs, social media, and personal newsletters. You can't even run from your damn self. For better or worse, you're branded. So what do you think about this concept of like personal branding? So Sheryl Sandberg sort of takes issue with this idea of we're not brands. She says, find your voice, not your brand. How do you see this playing out in the tension that sort of the disruptor faces?
Yeah. Well, similar to the elevator pitch, there is this, we are our social media accounts, our blogs, our podcasts. I mean, my God, half of us are running around with like personal newsletters. And there is this pressure that everything has to be on brand. And so to pick a brand, you have to pick a persona. Like, are you going to be the, like when I was in venture capital, I felt like, I was donning all black, and I was like, my picture was this like black and white cross arms, like boss, kind of like, body, signaling, posture. And, we really do sort of adopt these brands based on where we are in our lives, instead of viewing our lives as more of this experiment where the brand doesn't have to be this like it comes with the friend group and the wardrobe and the vacation destinations, and the like. That gets us into trouble when we find ourselves in a brand that no longer resonates, no longer fits, and we feel ourselves wanting to move out of. And this happened recently with a friend who is in a hypermasculine industry, as an entrepreneur in a hypermasculine industry, and recently made a post about women power and got a lot of flack for it from his like primarily male followers. And he was kind of breaking with the brand of the space that he was in by sharing this more sensitive, more emotional post, and got a lot of pushback. And while he handled it extremely well, I think that for a lot of disruptors, a lot of entrepreneurs, they don't like that dissonance and that pushback. And so, it's being able to start off with a brand that's a little bit more embracing of taboos, of contradictions, and of change. And so instead of defining yourself so rigidly, how do you create a brand that is a little bit more holistic and again, forgiving of the waves that will come in your life?
And how do you manifest that self when you see the fact that we sometimes are beholden to the tyranny of the minority, right? Where there's sort of this, maybe it was the vast majority of his followers or fans were supportive, but they couldn't say anything because the trolls come out and they sort of do that. How do you see people playing that out where there is this noisy part of the audience that it makes the most noise, but may not be the real sentiment?
Yeah, I think it goes back to their why. And I think as long as they feel firm in their why, which is why, part of this is done kind of in a sequential order. Like you have to sort of figure out your why first.
Right. He
was able to overcome that dissonance and that pushback because he knows that his why is actually to bring us maybe a little bit of a softer side to this masculine space. And so, overcoming that hit to the personal brand, if you will, was an easier blow than someone who is maybe not as secure in their why and can't use that as a Band-Aid to fix the ouch when the hits come.
It's interesting. What do you think about that? Do you think that when Sheryl Sandberg says people aren't brands, we can't be packaged that way? Do you think she pushes the voice? Do you think that's realistic, or do you think we are in an era when humans are brands?
I think if we're not brands, we certainly think and act like we are.
Yeah.
Or else we wouldn't feel so much stress and tension every time there was, a shift in our life that required us to adjust our social media. I mean, we all have that friend who underwent the big life change, and then all of a sudden, like their whole persona changed, and that may or may not have caused some psychological turbulence for them, because that can be really jolting to the foundation, the stability of the self, when there's this big shift in how you present yourself to the world. And so the argument is not isn't necessarily that you should not have a brand. It's just to create one that is adaptive and flexible and impermanent.
And I think the other thing that your sort of subtext of this a little bit was that making the brand something that's sort of spiky, so much so that it's like, I had this big change, here's me, look at me, versus trying to be a little bit consistent with your voice, your brand, your message, I think is something that I find people are sometimes very hesitant to use their social media platforms for good things, because they're like, well, I haven't been talking on social media now. It's like, talk a little bit, share, open, be authentic.
Yeah. And don't be afraid for the pushback. I mean, I won't lie, since I've been, more letting my freak flag fly, I've lost some followers and I gained some followers. And some of the people who used to like every post don't like every post, but then a new set of people do. And so, and that's something that definitely took some getting used to, is like, this must be wrong.
Right.
This is not, I should lock it down, be the impression manager, personal brand needs to be back on point.
Yeah.
Because clearly this isn't resonating with some, but it just means that, you need to find the audience that resonates with your new why, or the why that really is your real why.
Right. So before I want to cover one more of these, but I want to ask a kind of more of a question about you creating something. Because I think it was interesting to observe, you've been blogging for the last 3 or 4 years now, or 4 years, I think, on this with ColorfulCortex. And you made an intentional decision to say, I'm going to launch this as a series.
Yes.
And, these are not short posts, right? These are not like, hey, a quick, 3 paragraphs. These are long, and they're in depth, and you're putting a lot of information out there. why did you decide this was sort of the place to put down and to come up with this as a series? How did you approach it to develop something of this substantive depth?
It's so funny, and I do think that most creators can empathize, and this will resonate with them. It was months and months and months and months and months of being like, I feel like I have something that's like about to be born, and I don't know what it's going to look like,
Right.
but like, and I have the pieces, but I have no idea what it is. And then it was literally, all of those posts were written in like 5 days.
Really?
Well, just because it was like everything was just clicking until it was just like, I basically blockaded myself into my apartment for a week and wrote it. And I do think that's just kind of like the nature of the creative process. But
you've been creating the ideas, the concept, the stories, the processes, and testing it on yourself and others.
It was ready to be born.
And then
it was like, Mom, we're going.
Yeah.
Like, it's time.
It's a very common thing that creators do, is that I think they oftentimes need I call it like the get smart phase. They need to spend more time getting smart and really knowing. And then it's like, okay, this is obvious how it comes together.
Yeah. And it was just, you would talk all the time when, we were in venture capital, that one of the biggest things you look for in the entrepreneur is like, why are they more, likely, best positioned than anyone else in the world to do this one thing? And like, why does their experiences and their background and their education or their network, like, why does it make them the person for it? And as I reflected on my background and the things that set me on fire, and a lot of that is written about in these articles, it was just so obvious that like, this is the thing that, when friends come to me for help, it's like they're asking these questions. When I'm dating people, we're talking about these things. When I'm with entrepreneurs, like, we're talking about these things. But it also came through a lot of personal learning and some hard times of my own. And again, when I say I write from a place of knowing, I want to underscore that boldly, because it was not an easy journey for me, and I went through the depths of funks, and I'm so glad that I did, because now I can share from a place of like, to use your word, authenticity, and so there is definite meaning to be created out of crisis, and I think that entrepreneurs are best positioned to do that.
And you've I'd say there's this sort of struggle that I think, even being, a non-traditional young female in the venture capital industry, that I would say is heightened. There's a lot of places that are, it's sort of a boys' club. This is like, the data is staggeringly bad, and I think in DC it's perhaps even worse. I don't. There's not a lot of peers for you to look up to. So I'm seeing that journey. It was both illuminating and exciting at times, but also isolating.
Oh, totally. And I felt like most of the time I was just like crashing into a wall on my own, and I had no sounding board and no safety net. But it's just part of my, and maybe this will be what we talk about next, I'm not sure. Like, there is, as with many disruptors, a very intense energy in me that just needed to find its way out. And so for me, there was never an option of whether or not I would explore and share these things. It's part of my, it's just part of my path. What we do.
And it's, you were right. This is what I wanted to explore next, is connecting your Wi-Fi.
All right.
You how did you know? So you described the sort of extremes as separation and resonance.
Yeah.
And so I want to read a quote, and I thought this was a particularly, so first off, your writing is really, you're such a great writer that the way you write it, it's like, you draw people in with very like intoxicating words. So I think you do, this was one of my favorite clips that I pulled out, was speaking about these folks. Their energetic potential is intoxicating, which is why disruptors are often desired, followed, mimicked, and idolized. Everyone wants, quote, just 5 minutes with you. Everyone wants a piece of your magic. But on bad days, the disruptor's potential for positive energy can swing equally strong in the opposite direction. The funk is felt, the negativity is palpable, so the disruptor separates, detaches, and isolates. This is a powerful one, right? It's a real one. It's and oftentimes people will talk about the depression, and there's the quote I recall that I use a lot about, for those who've never been an entrepreneur, particularly an entrepreneur in like a high tech, high growth business, high stress area, like where you have employees. The Elon Musk quote of being an entrepreneur is like standing on the edge of the abyss, staring out and chewing on glass. Yep. So this is sort of
one of my favorite.
That's what you're describing.
That is so, yes, it's so spot on. So this goes back to, and in sort of my personal healing journey and process, I learned a lot about energy and energy work through yoga, through Reiki, through acupuncture, through meditation, and started putting a lot of the dots together in terms of what I felt around disruptors, because and maybe it's just as someone who's very sensitive to energy, I mean, to me, it's an actual like palpable sensation being around them, especially when they're in the highest of their highs and the lowest of their lows. And so back to the quote that you mentioned in the beginning, entrepreneurs are wired for manifestation. Disruptors are lightning rods of energy that like it takes a special kind of kinetic potential to create something from nothing. And that's literally the job description. And so they have to have a lot of potential energy. And so resonance is the idea, and it's sort of more fully called limbic resonance, that we sync up to the states of other people around us on a physiological level, for better or for worse. And so because the disruptor is so energetically powerful, they are uniquely capable of influencing the emotions, the psychological rhythms, the physiological rhythms of the people they're around. And, if you've ever sat in a room of, furiously working entrepreneurs, or like, you've been in that boardroom during the tense meeting, like you could cut it with a knife. And so the, disruptor often finds himself in this place where some days they can give people their high. They can turn people on. People are following them down the street. They're on, they're captivating. There's a light, or they're walking around with a spotlight. And then it's like, just like that, the next day they may find themselves and they are affecting people negatively in a uniquely deep way. And it can be very confusing for the disruptor because they don't know why this is happening. And because they like to identify with that powerful, potent, good guy, good gal, and don't know why it can flip so strongly in the opposite direction. And so, the exercise in this is to sort of map your resonance and say, what are the qualities, the ways that you're making people feel in those best moments. And so for me, it's making people feel inspired, making them feel excited, making them feel energized, encouraged. I can also make people feel like they're being judged because I can be, critical and I'm always parsing things apart. And so in mapping this out, you can start to understand how you ideally want to, the sort of energetic flu you want to give people, and that can be a good flu. Like, what are the ways that you want to use your energy responsibly? Like, and this is the caveat, is that entrepreneurs and disruptors and creatives and innovators, they really have so much energy, which is a unique blessing that they have to be responsible with it. I touch on it in another article where, not using this energy properly or appropriately can result in a lot of physical issues, from illnesses to, psychological issues, because it's just pent up, repressed, stored energy. And again, that's part of the sort of energy work and being responsible with your energy. But disruptors can learn how to rub off, sync with people for better and not worse. And that's not to say you won't have your bad days, but you just have to know that, if you cough, someone else can catch it. So.
Right. It's an interesting concept. I one of the things I thought was that sort of I'm reminded of talking about that. It just sort of the way that you entirely embrace this is the way you're describing these things is, if you've seen the show Billions at all, where
Yeah,
there's
of course.
so you remind me of sort of this concept around high performing individuals, and they've hired this coach named Wendy Rhodes, who is right. Well, what you're saying reminds me a lot of that sort of reflection that they're out there, at a hedge fund. This is sort of a Connecticut high performance hedge fund, top hedge funds, Axe Capital, and in a lot of ways, Wendy is helping these people find themselves again. Mm-hmm. And so it's an interesting concept. How do you see this like element that you're almost doing in sort of coaching other people that you see in this? What have you seen the importance of that for someone in is the disruptor, the creator, the innovator?
Yeah. So first and foremost, it's knowing that they're not an island and they're not alone.
Right.
And so, my first goal, first intention is always to make people feel like they're not alone
Mm-hmm.
in their suffering and their struggles. And that, second, that these funks, the identity crises, the little meltdowns, the breakdowns that can happen, it's part of the journey, and
Mm-hmm.
it can be used for such immense growth,
Mm-hmm.
that what was so imminent and pressing for me to share was this idea that the suffering doesn't have to be in vain,
Mm-hmm.
and that the creative and manifestation-oriented potential of the disruptor makes them uniquely capable of really transforming their funk into something even better, even
Mm-hmm.
greater, even more like an even more potent version of themselves. And so through energy work, through self-identity work, and through some sort of psycho-emotional spiritual processes, you can really not only lessen the likelihood of kind of finding yourself in a funky place, but if you are there,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe not all of these resonate with you, maybe it's one, maybe it's two, maybe it's all of them, you can get out of it in a very meaningful, efficient, and impactful way that not only benefits you, but it's
Mm-hmm.
going to benefit your company, and it's going to benefit your relationships, and hopefully carry you through the rest of your life.
Yeah, we could sit here talk for hours, but I know you've got to go. But I have one last question for you, just that I wanted to dig into very briefly. Is you've lived in this interesting place where you've been both, the datey or the other side of sort of being in a relationship with this, as well as now find yourself as the creator and those things oftentimes. So what advice would you now give to someone who is that they're in a relationship, be it a romantic relationship or a working relationship with someone that has these elements? What are the things that you would advise, yourself back years ago, or even now? Like, what are the things that you tell someone to sort of recognize these things and help that person be the best version of themselves?
Yeah, I think that the only thing that we can be in life is just mirrors for each other. I really do believe that.
Interesting.
I don't think that, because trust me, Lord knows I tried changing some of especially the romantic ones, and it doesn't work. No, it just doesn't. So, but what does work is being a mirror and holding space.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, look, whether it's working in a disruptive industry, dating a disruptor, being friends with it's not for everybody.
Right.
But I think that really helping them recognize these strengths and even the weaknesses that can become superpowers, giving them a stable platform to constantly bring them back home to who they are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's like what's more beautiful than just like constantly being able to be like, here, you may not
right.
changing your elevator pitch and your personal brand is all over the place and your like FOMO is just absolutely crazy. But like, look, I see you and I know who you are, and I'm going to keep showing you that until you damn remember it, because like, I believe in you. Yeah. And so, I I think that's, again, the only thing you really can do.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks so much for hanging out. And again,
my gosh, anytime.
ColorfulCortex.co. You can find Jess all over the place. And
smoking a cigar after that.
That's right, smoking a cigar. That's exactly right. And you do sometimes. Do you do any coaching sometimes? Periodically?
I do. I do. So people can absolutely find me on my blog, Colorful Cortex. Very responsive also over social media, Instagram, Facebook, the like.
I shared this with Jess before we got on. I think that mental wellness, so I don't like the words mental health, mental illness. I think mental wellness is like the next great trend. And, I had the privilege of teaching Bill Campbell's daughter, Kate, and I learned a lot just about like how the highest performers think about these elements. And Bill Campbell was an amazing human, but a lot of the things that you may have sort of quantified from psychology and research, he did naturally. And so not all of us can have a Bill Campbell, but I do think it's important to sort of take that into account as we're thinking about our own lives.
Well, everyone, have fun, be disruptive, but be good to yourself. That's
awesome.
The whole deal.
Jess, Carson, everyone, thanks so much for hanging out.
Of course.